This week's Parsha, Parshat Chaye, finds Abraham at the end of his life, and all that is left for him now is to help his son Isaac find a partner, find a wife. So he brings in his trusty servant Eliezer and gives Eliezer his mission, which is to return to Abraham's homeland and to find a suitable marriage partner for Isaac. And he's giving Eliezer the mission, and he makes Eliezer take a vow, swear an oath that he'll follow Abraham's exact instructions about who is a suitable candidate. And what's interesting is the phraseology, is the wording around what does the vow look like. So we're looking at Genesis chapter 24, verse 2. Vayomer Avraham el avdo zakan beito, and Abraham said to his servant, the sort of elder servant of the house, Hamoshel bekol asher lo, who was in charge of everything that was Abraham's, Simna yadcha tachat yerechi, place your hand under my thigh, va'ashbiacha ba'Hashem Elokei hashamayim, and I will make you take a vow. I will sort of facilitate your taking an oath to God. The key interesting phrase here is place your hand under my thigh. So what does that mean? What type of vow is that? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Lafi שהנשבע צריך שיטול בידו חפץ של mitzvah. Someone who's taking an oath needs to hold a mitzvah object, an object that has some holiness to it. Just so we have a sort of related concept, which I think derives from here. In modern day American court systems, in some situations, people who are giving testimony have to place their hands on the Bible and say they swear to tell the truth. So here too, there was an idea that you would place your hand on something holy. So what's the mitzvah object here that Eliezer has to hold? So typically, Rashi continues, you would do a sefer Torah or tefillin. You would do it on a Torah scroll or a set of tefillin, of phylacteries. Those are mitzvah objects. But what is Eliezer doing? He puts it on the milah, the brit milah, on Abraham's genitals, where he had a bris, he had been circumcised. והמילה היתה mitzvah ראשונה לו. And why is this happening? Because Abraham's brit milah, his circumcision, was his first mitzvah, his first commandment that he received from God. ובאה לו על ידי צר, which it was painful to him. והיתה חביבה עליו ונטלה. It was therefore all the more beloved to him, and that is why he instructed Eliezer to place his hand there. Now this might seem very sort of graphic to our 21st century ears, but clearly there is something meaningful happening here. So let's now see what the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal of Prague, has to say about this. He says, Ve'en lahakshot sheyishba Eliezer b'milah shelo. Don't ask, or don't say, wait a sec, shouldn't Eliezer have put his hand on his own brit milah, which we know he received? Dezeh ein kasha, that's not a problem. Tekevan detzarich likach chefetz ein likikat chefetz davar shehu gufo. Because we have this, if we have an idea that you need to have a mitzvah object in your hand, it's sensible to say that that can't be something on your own body. Ulefikach nishba b'milah shel Avraham. That's why he put his hand on Avraham's brit milah. Uma she'amar shehi mitzvah rishona. And when Rashi goes on to say that this is because it was Avraham's first mitzvah, lo shenatan ta'am shahaya lo likach mitzvah acheret. This isn't like he's saying, really Avraham could have done, should have instructed Eliezer to place his hand on a different mitzvah. Couldn't have meant that. Why? Shahare ein mitzvah acheret. There was no other mitzvah at this time, sheyishba ba, that he could have taken an oath on. Shelo nitztava Avraham rak b'mitzvah zot. mitzvat ha'akeda. Abraham had only been commanded to do two things, to do the brit milah and to sacrifice Isaac. So it can't mean that. Ela hachi perusho. Rather, what does it mean? Afagav devadai devar shal kedusha kegon tefillin yoter adif. What it means is it's true. If there had been the possibility of putting his hand on something like tefillin, phylacteries, or on a Torah scroll, that would have been preferable. V'al ze amar she'i mitzvah rishona she'achar kach nitzta ve'ba'akeda ulefikach bachar b'mitzvah zot v'lo b'tefillin. Rather, it's the fact that because this was the only one that existed, that's why he had to do it. It's not to say that there were a variety of mitzvahs and he chose this one because it was the first one, but rather they chose this one because it was the only one at this time that had been given. So that's the first thing the Maharal says, which is interesting. But what's more interesting will be what he goes on to say now. Namely, Kasha me Yaakov, Shehishpia le Yosef nami tachat yirecho. He says the real problem is this, that at the end of the book of Genesis, Jacob, who's Abraham's grandson, who has not yet been born in our Parsha Chaye Sarah, Jacob, at the end of his life, has his own son Joseph. That's, of course, Abraham's great-grandson. Jacob has Joseph take an oath. And he uses the same language. He says, put your hand, my son, also under my thigh, meaning ostensibly on the spot of Jacob's brit milah, on his own genitals. And if you want to say, like we're saying here regarding Abraham, that that was the only mitzvah available, well, presumably that in Jacob and Joseph's time, that's no longer true. There were other holy objects that Joseph could have placed his hand on. So if this is our reasoning here regarding Abraham, then what's the reasoning later in the Torah regarding Jacob and Joseph? And he gives a I think, very strong answer. V'nireh lomar, I think the answer is as follows. Devadai minhag ba'oto zman lihiyot nishba kach l'sum hayat tachat yerech shel mishehu nishba lo. He says that this was the minhag. The custom at that time was that any time you were taking an oath, you would put your hand on the person's genitals whom you were making swear. Shekach hayad derech ha'umot. This was not just the Jewish custom, this was the custom of the world. Sheyihiyeh hanishba berushut oto shenishba lo lasot kamo sheyitzaveh oto. It was a form by which the person who was being sworn in to do something, the person taking the oath, by putting their hand on the genitals of the other person, that sort of indicated that they were submitting themselves to the will of that person. So this, he said, and he also notes that the Ibn Ezra, another medieval commentator, also had this idea. So, says the Maharal, Lefikach, therefore, because it was the way of the world, Gave Yaakov, regarding Jacob, Hutzrach lahashbia kafi minhag ha'umot. He had to make his son swear according to what was customary in the world. Why? Shelo yomar paro, so that Pharaoh wouldn't later say, Avicha, your father, asher hishbiacha lahaloto le'eretz Canaan, lo hishbiacha kafi adat ve'en kan shavua. This is fascinating. First of all, what was the promise that Jacob was making his son Joseph make? That when Jacob, who was about to die, would die in Egypt, he wanted his son Joseph to promise him to take an oath that when Joseph ultimately left, or later, when the Israelites would later leave Egypt, that Jacob not be, that his bones, that when Jacob died, Joseph would take Jacob to be buried in the land of Israel, in the cave of Machpelah. I conflated for a second what will also later happen for Joseph. But Jacob says to Joseph, I want you to bury me in the land of Israel and swear to me to do that. And he purposely made him swear by putting his hand under his thigh That's the word, which is a euphemism for putting his hands on his genitals, because that was what was customary amongst the nations. And in so doing, it would prove to Pharaoh, who apparently would know that this was the type of oath made, that this was a true oath, and therefore Joseph would have to do it. He'd have to leave Egypt to go bury his father Jacob. Jacob was worried, if I don't make my son swear in this way, that Pharaoh might say that wasn't a real oath. You don't have to take him. Don't worry about it. So that's why he did it. So now that the Maharal has said that that's the explanation for what's going to happen at the end of the book of Genesis, he then concludes by saying, "V'kan shehu tzarach latet tam mipnei mitzvat hamila lefi shekash Rashi." So why did Rashi have to say that's the reason here? Now that we know that's the reason there, then how does this explain what Rashi said? Because Rashi was trying to understand, Demala Avram kafi minhag umot haya lo lashpia b'nikitat chayfetz. So if that's really the answer, that it's because this is what the nations of the world do, then why did Avraham have to do it here? Avraham didn't have to make Eliezer swear in this way because what the nations of the world would think. So that's why Rashi explains it by saying that he wanted Avraham wanted Eliezer to put his hand on a mitzvah object, and that's why he used the place of the Brit Milah, not because of what the nations of the world would think, but for this other reason of wanting to do it on a sacred, on a mitzvah object, and which is why he chose to do the site of the Brit Milah. So a very interesting insight into this custom. He ends up giving the Maharal explaining Rashi, therefore, and in so doing, he basically says there's two distinct reasons for the two times we see in Genesis that the hand being placed under the thigh. One, in Abraham's time, is not about what the nations would think. It's really just about using a mitzvah object. Whereas later with Jacob and Joseph, it's about being a recognized sort of official type of oath according to the custom of the way of the world. Fascinating learning with you as always. More next week.